Hi everyone, we're going to talk about the untruth of emotional reasoning. First, we can read in the chapter 2 of the book an example of a student that is feeling blue and anxious. So he asked for help in his college and talked with a therapist, but the answer of the therapist is that he is in danger because the therapist argued that people who are expressing anxiety are in a very complicated situation. As a result, the student feels worse and express more anxiety than before. Each example show us that sometimes the people receive the opposite that they need. Yeah. The second part is about Boetius. Boetius was an ancient senator in Rome, and before of his execution, he talks with Lady Philosophy and an evangelical representation of the philosophy. And Lady Philosophy uh, makes thinking to Boetius about the positive side of his life, and he he can see not only the negative aspects but also the positive, and he starts to feeling better. And finally, we can read about the happiness philosophy, the rider and the elephant metaphor, when the text talk about how sometimes our mind is divided and in conflict because uh, we can't. We think sometimes that we have in control some situations, but it's like an elephant that we cannot control because sometimes there are things that are out of our control. And the rider represents the conscious or control process, and the elephant represents everything else that goes on in our minds. So that's the main point of this part, to show that sometimes we act without conscious, or we don't ask why or the reason that we are. Okay, the another concept that we can learn in the chapter 2 of the book is microaggressions. This concept was popularized in 2007 by the professor Deralwin Su. She is a professor of the Columbia University's Teacher College, and it is a complicated concept because it concept encourage mental habits similar to cognitive distortions because it's defined as a breed of uncommonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults toward people of color, or in other groups. But I said that is a complicated concept because it creates misperceptions, because that those macroaggressions, the professor get a list of aggressions that are related to stereotypes, and yeah, there are common mistakes in our society because the people is assuming the words about the other people. The people think that the other people is against them. So for that reason, we can't think about in two important concepts about microaggressions that are the intention, if it is real, and the impact. The impact is the result of that aggression, and it is an important aspect because we can encourage our students to think about it, to think about if the aggressions are real, if there are more than misperceptions, if you really think that the other people is against you, or maybe there are your emotions that are working against us. So yeah, we can discuss more about those concepts. We are acting like that or talking like that. Yeah, those concepts and those kind of uh, aspects in the class. Thanks.
Okay guys, following the ideas of the authors, we have CBT. So what is CBT? What is the connection between emotional reasoning and precisely CBT? And why so important to talk about it? So cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, born as an alternative therapy for treating depression in the year of 1960s, was developed by Aaron Beck, a psychiatrist at the University of Pennsylvania. So basically, Aaron Beck saw the connection between the thoughts a person has and the feelings that comes with them. So in author words, and a quotation that I have just right here, the patients tend to get themselves caught in a feedback loop in which irrational negative beliefs cause powerful negative feelings. So basically, the person tend to find evidence to support the negative and irrational beliefs by a reasoning distortion. So I have the representation of feedback loop. So if you have irrational negative beliefs, you're gonna have negative feelings. So it creates a distortion of reality, and the problem here is that you react based on your feelings and based your irrational thoughts. So it's a huge problem because you're based on nothing. So as we said, we call emotional reasoning of that. Your reasoning, your capacity or your ability for think is based on your emotions, and the evidence it's like just a thing that isn't doesn't exist. So remember that emotions and evidence are really different, because emotions could be irrational and it's okay, but evidence has a logical pattern or a facts or that you can test and prove. So that is evidence, and emotion could be the rest of everything, but, but it's irrational, so it doesn't make sense. So I have the example of that. Imagine that you're in front of the door of your girlfriend or boyfriend house, and just and nobody answer and nobody open you the door. So what are you gonna do? Just knowing down and through the door and screaming because maybe your irrational negative beliefs says you that maybe your boyfriend or girlfriend cheating on you. It sounds weird and sounds like you're gonna have seriously problems and troubles with the police or so on. So it could be the worst path for choosing. So you must to have evidence. You need to have evidence for act. Before act, please think, and please don't use emotional reasoning and so on. So basically, this chapter says that. Okay, guys, for closing our previous CBT stuff and so on, I have to say that CBT is the answer to emotional reasoning. So, CBT invite us to consider another possible options to interpret social situations. So basically it's that, so keep in mind, because we're gonna talk about in this in class. So for answer maybe the question or previous question about we do have emotional reasoning at UPN, I'm gonna answer with these invitations according to the authors. Okay, so these invitations consist of banning people and for being specific speakers. So also is another way of emotional reasoning. The author exposed the fragility of thinking and the lack of argue in which we don't consider is right. Feelings are upsetting, hating, uncomfortability, and angry comes from precisely of what we don't consider or think, or we don't agree with that. So we only agree with the things that make us feel good. Even it doesn't matter that she is saying it's rational or has sense. So I have, for example, a cycle that explain good that. So we have the cycle, and usually we consider or perceive a line of that. So a line has extremes where usually people stand up with the ideology. So the extreme uh, will be the side of the extreme ideology. But nowadays we have a cycle of that dynamic. So we have people fighting for freedom of speech and diversity banning people. And we have people is being banned for banning others. So my question is there any difference between both teams? Because the only one is that both banning people. So the hypocritical situations comes from people fighting for freedom of speech and diversity. So the diversity, it's what? Where is the diversity in that? But is ideologies or ideas that we can discuss, that we can argue, and maybe construct that we saw in theories and laws and so on. So the diversity allow us have a progress of own thinking and our minds. So the cycle says us that the people that is fighting for, it's the same people that the same group is banning. So is there isn't a difference in that. So this invitation basically says that the lack of argue, the lack of diversity of ideologies. If you think different to me, you're the wrong guy or the wrong girl, and I'm right. I only have the right. So mm, maybe we have been a crisis of thinking because everybody think in the same way. So that's all for our chapter. Thank you.